The cabinet door slammed into my ribs. Evelyn's fingers dug into my wrist like a vice. The medical package lay open between us, my secret lab tests exposed. My mother-in-law's smile never wavered as she twisted my arm, her voice sweet as poison. "Such a clumsy girl, Sarah. Let me help you clean that up." But the vials were already hidden, and the truth was in my shaking hands. Her organic supplements weren't herbs. They were lead, and I'd been swallowing them for months. The bruises would heal. The tremors wouldn't. The rhythmic scratch of Sarah Miller's pen against her journal was the only sound in the kitchen, a dry rasp that felt like sandpaper against her nerves. She sat at the mahogany table, the wood cool and unforgiving under her forearms. On the screen of her laptop, a cursor blinked steadily, hovering over a confirmation page for a laboratory in New Jersey. She had used the name Jane Doe and a burner email address she'd accessed through a series of redirected links, a digital trail she hoped was invisible to Mark's watchful eyes. Her left thumb began to twitch, a tiny, rebellious shudder that she couldn't suppress. She looked down at the paper, recording the time, 10:14 a.m., and the sensation, tremor in extremity, metallic taste like sucking on a penny, vision rendering at 70%. Asterisk. She whispered the hex code for the pale yellow of the kitchen walls. #FFFACD, trying to anchor her consciousness as a wave of dizziness washed over her. The air in the house smelled of lemon wax and the cloying, antiseptic scent of her mother-in-law's lavender floor cleaner. It was a smell that usually promised safety, but lately, it felt like a shroud. Sarah tapped the mouse, her pulse drumming against her collarbone like a trapped bird. She had spent the last hour navigating the hidden corners of the web to secure this blood panel. Every digit she entered into the form felt like a brick being removed from a foundation she had once thought was solid. She needed to know why her hair was thinning, why her joints felt like they were filled with crushed glass, and why the health-restoring teas Evelyn brewed left her feeling like her soul was being slowly erased. A floorboard groaned in the hallway. Sarah froze, her hand hovering over the journal, fingers stiff. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until the wind rattled the window pane. She exhaled, the breath hitching in her chest. She tucked the journal beneath a stack of unpaid medical bills and closed the laptop lid. The plastic clicked, a sharp, final sound. Her vision blurred for a second, white spots dancing across the kitchen tiles like static on a screen. She gripped the edge of the table, the wood's grain pressing into her palms. If the lab confirmed her suspicions, the quiet order of this house would shatter. She forced her hands into her lap, hiding the tremors as she heard the front door lock turn. The heavy scent of Chanel No. 5 drifted through the foyer, preceding Evelyn Miller like a shadow. Sarah smoothed her apron, her face a mask of practiced calm, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "Sarah, dear, you're up early?" Evelyn's voice drifted in, melodic and suffocatingly sweet. The older woman appeared in the doorway, her silver hair pinned back in a clinical bob that didn't have a single strand out of place. She carried a small brown paper package, her eyes immediately darting to the laptop on the table. "Just catching up on some design work, Evelyn," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the thrum of adrenaline. "The Boston firm has a deadline for the new branding project." Evelyn walked to the sink, her movements precise. She began her ritual, the triple wash, lather, rinse, repeat. The sound of the running water filled the kitchen, a 5-minute countdown that Sarah knew meant a treatment was coming. "We mustn't overexert our precious heart, darling," Evelyn said over the splash of the faucet. The brain fog gets so much worse when you stare at those glowing screens. We discussed this with Mark. Sarah watched Evelyn's hands, red, raw, and scrubbed clean of any perceived filth. I'm feeling a bit stronger today. I thought a little work might help. Evelyn turned off the tap with a sharp twist of the wrist. She picked up the brown package and set it on the counter. Actually, I have something for you. A delivery arrived while I was at the market. It looked medical. Sarah's stomach dropped. The lab kits. She had timed the delivery for when Evelyn was supposed to be at her bridge club, but the older woman was always a step ahead. A predator disguised as a caregiver. Oh, that's just some vitamins Jennifer recommended. Sarah lied, reaching for the box. Her ribs ached. A dull throb from where she'd bumped into the counter earlier. But she pushed through the pain. Evelyn's hand clamped down on the box first. Her grip was surprisingly strong for a woman of her age. Jennifer? That girl is so loud, Sarah. So chaotic. We really shouldn't trust her remedies over the protocol the doctors have set. It's just supplements, Evelyn. Please. Sarah reached out, her fingers brushing the cardboard. The transformation was instantaneous. The mask of the saintly mother slipped, revealing a cold, clinical hardness. Evelyn yanked the box back. I think I should inspect this first, for your safety. No. Sarah lunged, her desperation overriding her weakness. They grappled in the center of the kitchen, the scent of lavender and sweat mingling in the air. Sarah felt a sharp pain as Evelyn shoved her back, her hip catching the corner of the heavy oak island. The breath left her lungs in a wheeze. You're being hysterical, Evelyn hissed, her eyes wide and unblinking. Sarah didn't answer. She used the momentum of the stumble to snatch the box from Evelyn's momentary lapse in grip. She scrambled toward the library, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her ribs felt like they were being pierced by hot needles, but she didn't stop. She burst into the library, the smell of old paper and dust greeting her. She needed a place, somewhere Evelyn wouldn't look. Her eyes landed on a thick, leather-bound volume of The History of Modern Design, a book Mark never touched. She fumbled with the hollowed-out center she'd carved weeks ago, shoving the diagnostic vials inside. She slammed the book shut and shoved it back onto the shelf just as Evelyn reached the doorway. Sarah turned, leaning against the mahogany shelves, her face pale but her expression defiant. She forced her breathing to slow, though her lungs felt tight. I put them away, Sarah said, her voice a whisper. I'll take them later, I promise. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her chest heaving slightly, her perfect bob finely disarrayed. She stared at Sarah for a long minute, her eyes scanning the room like a searchlight. Then the mask slid back into place. She smoothed her skirt and sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. We really must work on these outbursts, Sarah. It's the illness talking. It makes you paranoid. It makes you cruel to the people who love you most. Evelyn turned and walked away, her footsteps retreating down the hall. Sarah sank to the floor, her back sliding against the books. She gripped her side, her fingers finding the blooming bruise on her ribs. She was safe for now, but the walls of the Miller estate were closing in. The house was quiet again, that heavy, artificial silence that felt like a weight. Sarah waited until she heard the rhythmic thumping of the laundry machine. Evelyn's signal that she was occupied with the purity of the linens. Shaking, Sarah crept back into the kitchen. She needed to see the supplements. She needed to know if her intuition, the only thing she had left, was still functioning, subverted. Sarah reached the cabinet where Evelyn kept the special herbal capsules. Her heart raced, a frantic click, click, click in her chest that matched the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. She took the bottle of Nature's Path Vitality and poured a handful of the clear capsules into her palm. They looked normal. Fine, greenish powder visible through the gelatin. She reasoned that if she could just prove these were tainted, she could show Mark. Mark was a lawyer. He believed in evidence. He loved her, surely. He was just caught in his mother's orbit, blinded by a lifetime of her care. If Sarah presented him with the truth, he would have to help her. He would see that his mother wasn't a saint, but a warden. This was the smart play. Gather the physical proof, present it logically, and break the spell. She took a small paring knife and carefully slit one of the capsules open. She expected to see a different herb, perhaps a cheap filler or a mild sedative. Instead, a heavy, dull gray substance spilled onto the white marble counter. It wasn't powder. It was tiny, perfectly round pellets. They were heavy, rolling across the stone with a metallic clink, clink, clink that sounded like miniature bullets. Sarah felt a surge of triumph. She'd done it. She'd found the smoking gun. She picked one up. It was soft, malleable under her fingernail. It was lead, pure, industrial-grade lead. She almost laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound. She wasn't crazy. The brain fog, the tremors, the failing organs. It was all here in the palm of her hand. She imagined showing this to Mark tonight. He would be horrified. He would call the police. They would leave this house, and she would finally be free. Of the lavender scent and the triple wash, she began to pour the pellets back into the bottle, her mind already rehearsing the conversation. Mark, look at this. This isn't medicine. Your mother is killing me. She felt a strange sense of peace, a clarity she hadn't known in months. The crisis was under control because she was smarter than the poison. Then she heard the floorboard behind her. Not the groan of the hallway, but the sharp crack of someone standing right behind her. She turned, expecting Evelyn. But it wasn't Evelyn. It was Mark. He was standing in the shadows of the pantry door, his silk tie perfectly centered, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his cheeks were pulsing. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at the gray pellets scattered across the white marble. "You weren't supposed to open those, Sarah," he said. His voice wasn't filled with horror. It was flat, clinical. "Mark, look." Sarah held out her hand, the lead pellets shimmering under the LED lights. "She's poisoning me. This is lead. This is why I'm sick." Mark didn't move. He didn't gasp. He simply adjusted his tie once, twice, 3 times. The tie tug. The signal that the lie was coming. "It's for your own good, Sarah," he whispered. "You were always so restless. Always talking about Boston, always looking at the door. Mother said this was the only way to keep you still, to keep us together." The world tilted. The white marble of the counter seemed to rush up to meet her. The betrayal wasn't just a crack in the foundation, it was the entire house collapsing. Mark hadn't been blinded by his mother. He was the architect of the prison. "You knew?" Sarah's voice broke, a small, jagged sound in the sterile kitchen. "I helped her measure the dosage," Mark said, stepping into the light. His eyes were unblinking, terrifyingly calm. "We're a family, Sarah. And families stay together. No matter what." Sarah backed away, her heels catching on the linoleum. She wasn't just facing a murderous mother-in-law. She was trapped in a house with 2 people who had decided that her life was less important than her presence. The lead pellets in her hand felt like a death sentence, and the man she loved was the one who had signed it. The evening air was thick with the scent of impending rain, and the cloying sweetness of the honeysuckle that climbed the miller's porch. Inside, the house was a hive of forced activity. Mark had returned to his successful lawyer persona, his voice booming through the hallways as he prepared for the arrival of the senior partners from his firm. "Sarah, the blue silk dress," Mark commanded, appearing in the doorway of their bedroom. He didn't look like a man who had confessed to slow-motion murder an hour ago. He looked like a man concerned with optics. Mr. Sterling expects a certain level of elegance. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her ribs aching with every breath. Her lungs felt heavy, as if the lead was already settling into the very fabric of her being. She looked at the dress, a vibrant cerulean #007BA7, and felt a wave of nausea. "I can't do this, Mark," she whispered. "I can barely stand." Mark walked over and gripped her chin, his fingers cold and firm. "You will stand. You will smile. You will be the picture of a recovering, grateful wife. If you don't, Mother has a much more immediate solution than the capsules." He let go, and Sarah felt the sting of his touch linger. She was a prisoner in a silk cage. She needed to reach the outside world, but the obstacles were mounting. She reached for the bedside table, her hand searching for her phone. It was gone. "Looking for this?" Mark held up her iPhone, the screen dark. "I noticed you were spending too much time on those designer forums. It's not good for your recovery. And don't bother with the landline. The storm coming in damaged the wires." He smiled, a terrifyingly empty expression, and left the room. Sarah heard the distinct click of the heavy brass lock from the outside. The bedroom, with its velvet curtains and plush carpet, had become a velvet-lined coffin. She dragged herself to the window, but it was a decorative sash window, painted shut years ago to keep out the drafts. She looked down at the driveway. Gary, the gardener, was there. He wasn't pruning the hedges. He was standing by the gate, his leathery face turned toward the house, a silent sentry in the fading light. Sarah felt a sob rise in her throat, but she choked it back. She was a designer. She dealt in structure, in logic, in the way elements fit together to create a whole. She looked around the room. There had to be a way out. She moved to the laundry room, a small offset of the master suite. The window there was high and narrow, a small rectangle of gray sky. She dragged a hamper over, her muscles screaming with the effort. She climbed up, her fingers clawing at the frame. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Miller?" The voice was low and gravelly. Sarah froze. She looked through the glass. Gary was standing right outside the laundry window, his hunched shoulders blocking the light. He looked up at her, his eyes devoid of any pity. "Mr. Mark says you're sleepwalking again," Gary said, his hand resting on the brick wall. "Says I should make sure you don't hurt yourself. Now, get down from there before I have to come in and help you." The threat was clear. Sarah stepped down, her legs shaking so violently she nearly collapsed. She was surrounded. Every exit was blocked, every voice silenced. She retreated to the mudroom, her mind racing. She saw Buster, the family's golden retriever, lying on his rug. He didn't lift his head. He didn't wag his tail. His breathing was slow and shallow. "Buster?" she whispered, kneeling beside him. She smelled the faint, chemical scent of sedative on his fur. Evelyn had even silenced the dog. The cruelty of it was a physical blow. Sarah stood up, her jaw tightening. She looked at the mudroom door, then at the stairs leading to Mark's private study. If she couldn't leave, she would find more proof. She would find something that even the local police couldn't ignore. She crept into Mark's study, the air smelling of expensive tobacco and old leather. She began to rifle through his desk, her fingers blurring as she searched for anything: a letter, a receipt, a confession. She found it in a locked bottom drawer, the wood splintering slightly as she pried it open with a letter opener. A bank statement. She scanned the numbers. Mark had been funneling his massive inheritance, money that was legally half hers, into a joint account. But it wasn't a standard account. She read the fine print, her design-trained eyes catching the legal jargon. The funds were only accessible to the secondary holder, Evelyn, if the primary holder was incapacitated or deceased. It wasn't just about keeping her home. It was a heist. They were draining her life to fill their coffers, waiting for the lead to finally turn her heart to stone. The sound of a car door slamming echoed through the house. The guests had arrived. The dining room was a theater of the absurd. The table was set with clinical precision, the forks exactly 2 inches from the plates, the napkins folded into perfect, crisp pyramids. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, the saintly mother in a lavender silk blouse, her silver hair shimmering under the chandelier. "A toast," Mr. Sterling said, raising his glass. He was a large man with a booming voice that seemed to vibrate the very air. "To Mark, our newest partner, and to his lovely wife's continued recovery." Sarah sat across from him, her cerulean dress feeling like lead weights. She looked at her glass. It was a specific crystal carafe, different from the others. She saw the way Evelyn watched her, a predator waiting for the prey to take the bait. "Drink up, Sarah, dear," Evelyn said, her voice a melodic hum. "It's a special vintage. Very grounding." Sarah felt the weight of the sedative in the air. She knew that if she drank that wine, she would never wake up. The incapacitation Mark needed would be complete by morning. "Oh, look at that bird." Sarah suddenly pointed toward the dark window, her voice sharp with feigned surprise. As the guests turned, Sarah's hands moved with the precision of a practiced designer. She swapped her glass with Evelyn's in a blur of motion, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The guests turned back, seeing nothing but the rain beginning to lash against the glass. "Just a shadow, I suppose," Sarah said, her voice trembling. She picked up the glass, Evelyn's glass, and took a small, careful sip. It was pure wine. She watched Evelyn. The older woman smiled, a victorious glint in her eyes, and took a deep, satisfied drink from the glass Sarah had just occupied. For a moment, hope flared in Sarah's chest. The hunter would become the hunted. The sedative would take hold, and in the chaos, Sarah would find a way to the guests, to the truth. But then Evelyn stopped. She looked down at the rim of her glass. Subverted. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold, sharp clarity. This was it. The plan was perfect. Evelyn would feel the heaviness in her limbs, the slow slide of her consciousness, and Sarah would have the leverage she needed. She could practically see the headline, "Local socialite accidentally drugs herself." It was poetic. It was just. Sarah felt her shoulders drop for the first time in weeks. She had outmaneuvered the nurse. Evelyn set the glass down. She didn't look sleepy. She looked focused. She ran a finger along the gold-leafed rim, her eyes narrowing as she spotted a tiny, microscopic smudge of coral-colored lipstick. Lipstick that matched Sarah's, not her own. The silence at the table became a physical thing, a vacuum that sucked the air from the room. "Sarah," Evelyn whispered. The name sounded like a curse. "Is something wrong, Evelyn?" Mr. Sterling asked, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. Evelyn didn't answer him. She stood up, her chair screeching against the hardwood floor, a sound like a dying animal. The saintly mother vanished. In her place was something ancient and feral. "You think you're so clever," Evelyn hissed. Her hand shot out, grabbing the crystal carafe and shattering it against the edge of the table. The wine, the drugged wine, spilled across the white linen like a blood stain. "You think you can play games in my house?" "Evelyn, please," Mark started. But she silenced him with a look that could have withered stone. "She tried to kill me," Evelyn screamed, her voice cracking with a manic, terrifying energy. The sedative hadn't worked because she hadn't drunk enough. But the realization of the swap had triggered something far more dangerous. A total psychotic break. She lunged across the table. Sarah scrambled back, her chair toppling. The guests sat frozen, their faces masks of suburban horror as the domestic facade disintegrated. Sarah turned and bolted toward the kitchen, her lungs screaming, her vision blurring into a smear of hashtag FFFFFF and hashtag 0000000. She burst into the pantry, the narrow space smelling of spilled vinegar and dust. She reached for the heavy marble rolling pin on the shelf, her only weapon. Evelyn was right behind her. She didn't look like a nurse anymore. She looked like a demon, her silver hair wild, her eyes blown wide. She swung a heavy silver cake stand, the metal whistling through the air. "Mark, help me!" Sarah screamed, her voice echoing in the cramped space. Mark appeared in the doorway. Sarah felt a momentary flash of relief. He was her husband. He would stop this. He would see that his mother had finally lost her mind. "Mark, please, she's trying to kill me," Sarah cried, holding the rolling pin out like a shield. Mark looked at his mother and then at Sarah. He didn't move to stop Evelyn. Instead, he stepped into the pantry and grabbed Sarah's arms, pinning them behind her back with a strength that made her bones groan. "I told you, Sarah," Mark whispered in her ear, his breath hot and smelling of red wine. "Families stay together. And sometimes, mothers need to discipline their children." He held her firm, exposing her throat, as Evelyn raised the marble rolling pin. The betrayal was complete. There was no hero coming. There was only the dark, the smell of vinegar, and the sound of her own heart counting down the seconds. The basement was a world of shadows and damp concrete. Sarah lay on the floor, her wrists bound with heavy plastic zip ties that bit into her skin. Her head throbbed where the rolling pin had grazed her temple, and her ribs felt like a cage of broken glass. Above her, she could hear the muffled sounds of the dinner party being concluded. Mark's voice, smooth and professional, explaining that Sarah had suffered a sudden collapse and needed rest. The sound of car doors, the retreat of the guests, the retreat of her last hope. The heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs creaked open. A shaft of yellow light cut through the gloom, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Evelyn descended the stairs, her footsteps a slow, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. She carried a small tray. On it was a single syringe and a bottle of clear liquid. "It's time to end the struggle, Sarah," Evelyn said, her voice back to that terrifyingly sweet lullaby tone. "The lead was taking too long. You were becoming difficult." Sarah sat up, her back against the cold stone wall. She looked at the syringe, then at Evelyn. A strange calmness settled over her. She was a designer. She knew how to manipulate elements. She knew how to create a narrative. "You won't do it," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly strong. Evelyn paused, a needle-thin smile touching her lips. "And why is that, dear?" "Because of the automated email," Sarah said. "I'm a graphic designer, Evelyn. I spend my life in the digital world. 3 hours ago, I set a protocol. If I don't enter a deactivation code into my laptop by 9 p.m., which is in exactly 5 minutes, a digital dossier will be sent to the Boston Police, the FBI, and every major news outlet in the state. Evelyn laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Mark has your laptop, Sarah, and your phone. He has the hardware, Sarah countered. He doesn't have the cloud. I forged your signature on a full confession, Evelyn. I scanned it weeks ago. I have logs of every meal, every symptom, every treatment. It's all there, waiting for a timer to hit 0. Evelyn's smile faltered. She looked toward the stairs, where Mark was standing in the shadows. She's lying, Mark said. But his voice lacked conviction. He knew Sarah's brilliance. He knew she lived in a world of data he didn't fully understand. Check the router, Mark, Sarah said. See the outgoing traffic queue. Or you can let me go and I'll stop the transmission. As Mark turned to run back upstairs, Sarah moved. She had managed to hide a small X-Acto blade from her craft kit in her waistband during the struggle in the pantry. With a sharp, practiced motion, she sliced through the zip ties. She didn't run for the stairs. She ran for the fuse box. She slammed the blade into the main power line, a shower of sparks erupting in the darkness. The house plunged into a total, suffocating blackness. Evelyn screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Sarah knew this basement. She had spent hours down here, hidden away, mapping the layout in her mind. She found the coal chute, a narrow, rusted opening that led to the driveway. She scrambled up the coal pile, the grit digging into her fingernails, and squeezed through the opening. She tumbled onto the wet asphalt of the driveway, the rain washing the coal dust from her face. She saw the strobing red and blue lights in the distance. The police. The email hadn't been an automated confession. It had been a direct distress signal to Officer Thompson, the stare counter she had cultivated for weeks, sending him snippets of family drama, until his curiosity finally outweighed his desire for neutrality. Mark burst out of the front door, his tie undone, his face a mask of fury. "Sarah, get back here." He lunged for her, but the driveway was suddenly flooded with light. "Police, drop to your knees, now!" Sarah watched as Mark was forced onto the wet pavement, his expensive suit soaking up the rainwater. She saw Evelyn being led out in handcuffs, her silver hair matted, her triple-wash hands finely dirty with the soot of the basement. Officer Thompson walked over to Sarah, his boots crunching on the gravel. 22, 23. He counted under his breath as he reached her. He looked at her bruised face, her trembling hands, and finally, for the first time, he didn't look away. "We found the logs, Mrs. Miller," he said. "And something else. We ran a quick check on the grandmother. Turns out Evelyn Miller doesn't exist. Not the one you know." Sarah felt the world tilt again, but this time it was a slow, steady rotation toward the truth. She was a nurse in a maternity ward in Chicago 32 years ago, Thompson continued. She disappeared the same night a baby boy was taken from his crib. Mark isn't her son, Sarah. He was her first victim. Sarah looked at Mark, who was weeping on the ground, his entire identity shattering in the rain. The family she had been dying for was a lie built on a foundation of kidnapping and madness. The hospital room was white, a pure, sterile hashtag FFFFFF that felt like a benediction. Sarah sat in the bed, a clear IV line running into her arm, flushing the lead from her system. Her hand still trembled, a lingering echo of the poison, but the metallic taste was gone. Jennifer Scott sat in the chair beside her, her red hair a vibrant splash of color in the clinical room. She was humming "Happy Birthday" as she obsessively wiped down the bed tray with an alcohol swab. I'm going to get you the best toxicologist in Boston, Sarah, Jennifer said, her voice 2 decibels too loud. And a lawyer who will strip that man of every cent he stole. Sarah looked at her hands. She thought about the hex codes, the technical logs, the way she had used her craft to save her life. She had spent years pleasing people who were trying to erase her. She had mistaken control for care and silence for safety. I don't need a fixer, Jen, Sarah said softly. I just need a car and a map. She looked out the window. The Boston skyline was visible in the distance, a jagged horizon of glass and steel. It looked cold, yes. It looked impersonal. No, it also looked free. 2 weeks later, Sarah drove away from the Miller estate for the last time. She didn't look at the manicured lawn or the fresh white paint. She looked in the rearview mirror at the shrinking house, a place of lavender and lead that could no longer hold her. She reached the city limits and rolled down the window. The air smelled of salt from the harbor and exhaust from the morning commute. It was a messy, chaotic, beautiful smell. She whispered a final hex code, #00FF00, the color of a green light, the color of going. Sarah Miller stepped on the gas, her hands steady on the wheel, and drove toward the rest of her life.